Hi, I'm Rachel Tepper-Paley, Digital Managing Editor at Wine Enthusiast Magazine. In this episode, brought to you by Deutsch Family Wine and Spirits, we're talking with James MacPhail, a Wine Star Awards nominee for 2024's Winemaker of the Year, and the Winemaker of the Calling, an impressive collection of handcrafted California Chardonnays, Pinot Noirs, and Cabernet Sauvignons that speak of authenticity and a clear sense of place. We sat down with James to learn more about the collection, from the meaning of the name The Calling to how each bottle reflects the combined passions of all the people involved in its making. After the episode, discover more about The Calling at thecallingwine.com. Hi, James. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about your background. How and when did you realize that winemaking was your calling?
Well, if I go back to kind of childhood days and teenage days, and I look at those days as kind of formative years in, the things that I did, learning about agriculture or learning a musical instrument. I think that all those things in my early years kind of molded me into, becoming a winemaker. There's certain things about life that you learn, and sometimes, you may not be eventually working in that exact field, but you learn disciplines and you learn skills that kind of allow you to, or they kind of parlay into something else. So I started playing classical piano at a very young age, and that discipline, taught me, focus and attention to detail, kind of being a kind of precise mind frame. My mom's side of the family were third generation dairy farmers, and so I spent a lot of time on the dairy ranch, and I think that time kind of gave me the love of agriculture. And so I kind of point to those two kind of specific things in my life that kind of led me to wine. I was always fascinated with wine. I grew up with wine around the table. My father taught my sister and I about wine and having it be a part of the meal, very European. And I always had the half water, half wine glass on special occasions. And so I think at an early age, I kind of joked that it got into my blood, and was always fascinated with the product. I always thought that it was really, really cool that you could make such a beautiful product from the earth that gave so much people joy and brought people around a table and brought, conversation, and it was part of people's lives and celebrations and everything else. So I didn't go to school for it. Originally, I had 2 tours of college for other degrees, but had a kind of a changing career in my early 20s, and threw everything in and decided to move on up to Healdsburg and learn how to make wine. Just kind of a pretty radical and pretty big decision at the time. But my family was like, "You're leaving what to go do what?" But it was just, it kind of felt like that was a calling, and that was kind of what I was meant to go do.
You grew up in California, right?
I did, yes. I grew up in Marin County, Santa Fe.
Got it. Because drinking, having wine as be part of the meal, it's very European, but it's also very Californian, I think.
It is, yes. Yeah, when you look at my family, they all are. My entire family are very big wine drinkers.
What did those early years in winemaking look like for you?
So when I kind of packed my bags and moved up to Healdsburg, I was, what was I, 26? And so, I mean, I was naive. I was stepping into something that, I had kind of book knowledge and, my own kind of hobby knowledge of, fermenting things and things like that. But I'll never forget the first day on the job, at my first job, I told myself, this is it. I just loved it. I mean, I was hired as a, harvest intern, and I was probably scrubbing a tank or something, and I'm blue jeans and a t-shirt. I'm like, this is great. A lot more romantic and a lot more exciting than scrubbing a dairy tank. I don't know if there's a correlation there, but I feel like it was just a little bit more exciting. I think it's just because I had the interest in wine. But yeah, those early days were spent at Kivera Vineyards out in Dry Creek Valley, and I was there for almost 4 years. And I did almost every position in that winery except being the winemaker. Very formative years in my career.
Tell me a little bit about your relationship with your family. You mentioned before they were like, "You're going to leave, do what? To do what?" You mentioned to me earlier that your father's blessing to pursue this was a big part of what finally gave you the push to do it. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the kind of the sad part of the story is that my parents passed away in my early 20s, and that was kind of the impetus for me just realizing that life was short and to go off and do something that you love, that you're really interested in. And I grew up in a family business in Marin County that started in 1880, and it's still going today. And of course, there wasn't a waking moment in my childhood, either it be after school, weekends, summers. If I wasn't on the dairy ranch, I was working for the family business. And we were all very proud of it. And that was our world. And so when I went off to college, my first tour and got a business degree, my father never really spoke about or never gave my sister and I like the pressure to go work for the family business. But when I graduated college, at that time, the business world was changing in the businesses that we were in. And so it was really no longer a family business. It was getting more competitive, and there was, competitors coming in, kind of the late 80s. And so I had a discussion with my father, I remember, and he kind of gave me the blessing of, this is, the business environment has changed. It's much more competitive and cutthroat. And he really kind of encouraged me to go find my calling. I mean, go do something that I was interested in, which was really, of course, a big relief. I think when others that have that conversation with with their family when they grow up in a family business or something, and then they're allowed to kind of be set free is a really cool feeling.
Yeah. When you told me that story, I couldn't help but think about the Calling wine and its story behind its name. Can you share that about how your experience mirrors that of the Calling owners, Peter Deutsch and Jim Nance?
Well, I think it's absolutely. I think there's a little serendipity in it that this all kind of came to be, being the winemaker for the Calling, in that their story mimics mine. It's kind of neat to be on a team where these kind of three key people all kind of found their calling, right? Inspired by their fathers and everything else, because it's exactly what happened with me.
Yeah. And each of them was sort of given permission by their fathers to pursue their
Yes,
passions.
exactly. But it's
Yeah.
like it's a great connection. It's a really neat connection.
Was that one of the things that drew you to the project? Were there other things that brought you in?
There was a lot of things that drew me to the project. Of course, when I first heard about the calling and the story behind it, I felt that was a pretty neat connection. I was told about the project from the previous winemaker, Dan Goldfield, who had called me up and said, "Hey, I think that you'd be a good candidate for this project." Dan wanted to, kind of spend more time on his brand and I think slowly kind of retire. And so it was a very natural fit because the wines that we make for the Calling we're all kind of in my world. I knew many of the vineyards. I had shared some of the vineyards with Dan and the Calling. Winemaking was Dan and I had very kind of similar winemaking styles, and So it's a very kind of natural fit.
Yeah. How would you characterize the wines in the calling? And I know it's a lot of wine. So big picture, is there something that you think is like a through line?
I like to say that, the calling, yes, between the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir and the Cabernets, and then, of course, the single vineyard tier of wines, they're all very authentic and honest wines from a specific place. And I say that specifically just because there's a lot of wines out there that are kind of losing their authenticity. I think when you have a little larger scale production, you lose that, but we have not. We've kept the wines very authentic, 100% variety, true to kind of honest wine from some of the best appellations in California.
When you say authentic and honest, is that like, are you talking about like lower intervention techniques? What do you mean?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I'm talking about winemaking that is honest, or wines that are not heavily manipulated. There are not a lot of additives used. They're authentic. They're real.
Yeah. And you'd also talked about how they're like 100% varietal wines, which I
Yes.
think is a big thing too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no mistaking a Pinot Noir for anything other than a Pinot Noir.
That's correct.
And there are a bunch of different collections within the calling. There's the platinum, there's the gold, there's silver. How would you describe those, and how would you recommend them to various drinkers?
Yeah, you have a great selection of wines for the consumer. Starting with the silver level, the kind of entry level appellation series wines, and for the consumer going into the store and picking up, for example, a bottle of the Sonoma Coast Chardonnay, I feel that wine is going to hopefully really impress them, and it's going to over deliver in both quality for the price that they paid. That's really that's kind of the little bit of the world that the calling is in, that these wines going to over deliver for quality versus price point. I would hope that for that consumer that is, gets turned on to the calling wines and are impressed, they can then explore, the next tier, which is the gold tier with the Russian River Pinot, the Dutton Ranch Chardonnay, and still, great wines, great price, and then, capped with the single vineyard tier with wines, a fruit that comes from some of the most coveted family vineyards in California. So you've got everything. Runs the whole gamut.
That's great. That's great.
The Calling is a dream collection of California wines offering a distinct range of varietals, styles, and best-in-class appellations. Winemaker James MacPhail gives each wine a clear, singular voice, working with renowned family growers to craft Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Cabernet Sauvignon, while collecting nearly 190-plus scores in the process. Join one of the Calling's fully customizable wine clubs for first access to new releases, special library vintages, and more. With 4 membership options, there's a club for every wine lover. For information and access, visit us at www.thecallingwine.com.
The Calling's Platinum Collection includes limited productions, single vineyard wines from some of Sonoma's most celebrated family-owned vineyards. Can you tell me a little bit about how they speak to a place, that place being Sonoma?
Yes. Oh my gosh. I absolutely love the single vineyard tier because I would put them up against any of the great wines in California. They come from such great vineyard sites that, we've been very, very fortunate to be able to be in these vineyards and be a part of these great kind of, just historic and also very well-known vineyards. The 2 Chardonnays, Sullivan Vineyard and Heinz. Sullivan is a historic vineyard that was planted by the Dutton family. There's quite a few other producers that also do a Sullivan single vineyard. That was planted in 1982. And then, of course, Charles Heinz Vineyard, which is probably one of the most historic Chardonnay vineyards out on the West Sonoma coast. Very, highly allocated fruit, but very fortunate, to be able to be in there. And then the three Pinot Noirs, the Foxed In, Terra de Primicio, and the Patriarch, which comes from a specific vineyard out on the West Sonoma coast as well. But again, very, highly respected, highly allocated vineyards. Terra de Primicio, my gosh, I think there's probably about maybe 7 or 8 producers that do a single vineyard, Terra de Primicio as well. So we're in great company. But they all speak to a very specific place here in Sonoma County. And I think that when you really look at the great wines of Sonoma County, they all come from a very specific site, and they speak to that site. Sonoma is one of the best places in the world to grow Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Cabernet from Alexander Valley. So it's a combination of our great soils and our climate that just make these wines sing. Expressive, beautiful wines.
I think sometimes the word calling is suggestive of a single person's pursuit of their passion, but I imagine that the calling is not that. It's the result of many people's passions that have come together. Would you agree with that? And do any stories come to mind about the people behind the bottle?
It's a great question because, yes, you're right. The calling, someone can have an individual can have a specific calling, but I think that in order to find your calling, I think it takes a lot of people contributing to that. I think that when people find their calling, I think you look back and I think there's been a lot of support to that in many different ways. And for this brand, there's a lot of people involved and a lot of other people that I feel along the line have kind of found their calling in whatever aspect that's being contributed, either it be a grower or a farmer or, someone else working in the winery alongside me that's helping me craft these wines. There's a lot of people along the way that love what they do and have found their calling to be a part of it.
Do any particular stories jump out at you, either from this last vintage or past vintages?
Well, I think that I know that there's a lot of vineyards that we're in, a lot of the family-owned vineyards, where those people are having their calling. I think that's probably, in my world, that's probably the greatest example of knowing someone. And I maybe Charles Heinz would come to mind. So Charlie grew up on the farm originally where the vineyard's planted, and he inherited it from his family. But he tells a story that he fell in love with the land and farming at an early age and knew that that's what he wanted to do. And he's turned that vineyard into one of the most sought after, highly allocated Chardonnay vineyards in California.
Wow. And I imagine that, every person who works at every single point of production, like the end result, the wine, the quality of that wine is dependent on every single one of those steps, like being someone's calling, like someone doing the best possible job that they can do, really, an attention to detail. So even it's like there are probably so many stories within the bottle.
There are, because think about all the people that are involved in making a bottle of wine. And I think that you can't, there's going to be a lot of those people along the way that are also, we're in this industry for a reason, and we're doing something that we love, and we're making something, we're crafting something, we're a part of something, either be a farmer, growing the wine grapes, loving, tending his or her land, the daily workers in the vineyard that are tending those vines, all the way to the winery working alongside, maybe it's kind of a younger person that's, pursuing their calling. May not have found it yet, but you can see their interest and their passion. And I get to work in a number of different wineries, and I'm around a lot of, interns and, kind of maybe the younger generation that are just getting into this industry. And I love seeing kind of like that spark in their eye or their interest, or they show something that you can kind of tell that they're working towards finding their calling. So you have all kind of, varying degrees of it. You have the generations that have definitely found their calling, and then you've got the ones that are, I think, on their way to finding it. So it's a really neat industry and product to be a part of all of that, from the beginning to the end.
I imagine it's sort of like you're describing a ripple effect of people's passions, just sort of, building upon one another. I have to imagine that translates to the consumer.
Absolutely. I think that there's no question, when you look at an artist or anyone who's crafting something, you hope that they're doing it for the love of it, that they have found their calling, and that they're putting that, love and energy and passion into a product that is hopefully ultimately, translated to the consumer, and they get to experience it.
How have drinkers reacted to this wine?
From my experience, this brand is doing extremely well. I go back to how this wine kind of over delivers. And I think it surprises people that they can go to their store and they can find a bottle of Russian River Pinot Noir from the calling at a great price and go home and enjoy it and go, wow, this wine is, again, 100% varietal. It's balanced. It hits all the nerves, checks all the boxes for what people love. And just drinking an honest, fun to drink wine.
And one that I think it probably has a ability that's unique to enhance a moment because it has like this sort of authentic and honest quality.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I like that a lot. I like to be able to make these wines in an authentic way, that we don't have to manipulate them, and that they speak to people. I think that's from what I've been reading and hearing and experience when I travel across the country for the calling, is that people love this brand and they love the wines because they're real. They're drinking Pinot Noir or they're drinking Chardonnay, and the Chardonnay is not masked by, sugar or too much oak, or, the Pinot Noir tastes like Pinot Noir. It doesn't taste like something else. So I think that resonates with people. I feel like the people really appreciate that. And, coupled with the great price of these wines, the brand is doing very well.
That's wonderful. I think that's a great place to wrap up. I certainly want a glass. Thanks so much, James, for chatting today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
When did your passion for wine become a calling, either personally or professionally? We want to know. Email us at podcast@wineenthusiast.net, and we might share your feedback on the podcast. We love hearing from you and appreciate your support. Please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. Remember to visit us at wineenthusiast.com for content and products that bring your love of wine to life.